Welcome to the True Sight podcast by Oracle's Elixir, your source for in-depth analytical coverage of professional League of Legends and the rest of the esports world. I'm Tim Magic Sevenhusen. Joining me today is the head coach of Golden Guardians Academy, Kublai Barlas. How are you, Kubz?
Hey, doing good, man. What about yourself?
I'm doing very well. I'm enjoying a gray Vancouver Island winter with just clouds
Ooh.
everywhere. A little bit of there's actually a nice view of a small mountain out my back window, so I'd like having the
Okay.
snow on it. You, meanwhile, I understand, are enjoying the view of pretty much nothing except your walls and computer screen.
Yeah, no, I'm hanging out. We're all just working from home, living our life, doing the schedule. So get to stare at the same wall all day now instead of my balcony, but it's fine.
Yeah, I think like if it wasn't for quarantines and COVID and all that kind of stuff, there's some nice stuff you can do in LA. But man, when you
One day.
yeah, if you're just stuck in there, not so much fun. So yeah, we're here because I want to talk to you, pick your brain a little bit about the academy experience, what's happening with your academy team. You're a coach who has been around quite a bit, coached in different places and different leagues, different parts of the world. So looking forward to learning a bit more about kind of your experience and what you've been through with that. But I think I'd love to start with kind of honing in on what you're doing right now with Golden Guardians Academy, working with that team. You joined the team during the off season, coming back from working in Europe for a bit. How have things been going with the team so far? Have you had enough time to like really start to connect in and start setting up systems and understanding the players you're working with?
Yeah, no, this is the first time in my entire career I'm working with a staff that I'm super like gelling with right from the start, and none of us have had really any issues, and it's been super productive. A huge thing that I enjoyed was the idea of player development. That's something I've obviously spent the last 3.5 years really putting time into, and people saw it with Optic and Immortals. My guys were going up and down consistently, and the idea of coming to do more player development with the group, which has very clearly put the most time into it from my perspective, and getting to join them, that was a no-brainer for me. So I got to come here and work with the people who I know, and with a new challenge, having some really fresh players, and maybe more limited experience, and actually being the one who technically I have the most experience. There's not really a player on my roster who has that much similar time. So it's a new challenge, but I'm enjoying it so far. It's really fun to be like the teacher in that way compared to maybe other teams I've been on.
Is that something where, being a kind of a player development coach and taking kind of raw talent and molding them upwards, is that something that you would say is like the way the kind of position you wanted to be in? Or because I think like if I go back several episodes talking to Kelsey Moser, for example, and she's pretty clear that what she wants is to be doing player development. She had the choice between coaching an LCS team and doing player development. The impression I got at least was she really enjoyed player development. And you've done a variety of different things, right? You've coached in the LEC, you've coached in the LFL, you're doing academy now. Is player development like, is that really where you enjoy landing the most, or is this something that you've kind of grown into as you've had the chance for it?
I think my whole career is just something I've been really, really good at. Right, like even if you go back to my first team, I am the only one who ever promoted an amateur team in both NA and EU into the LCS, right, with Complexity and Fnatic Academy. And I've had most of the success in my career at this level, right? Whenever I've gone up, my teams haven't necessarily performed to a good enough standing for me to actually like stay, right? And so while being at the top level is something I think everyone wants to do, and it's something I certainly intend to do again before my career is over, right now I am enjoying being in this position. It's just it's so different from having to focus on just winning, because you do get to teach the game a bit differently, because it gives you a bit more space to actually like help build complete players versus, well, how am I going to win this game? Well, typically you just pick to outscale if you're trying to win a BO1, but that doesn't really make you a better player for my POV, right? So I'm enjoying that I have that space a little bit more now than when it's a win every week kind of thing. It's different.
Yeah, it definitely is, and especially I think with the changes to the structure of academy and amateur and all of that in North America, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But I think that puts you in a position where you do have different goals as a team. And so coming into an academy, I think even certain individual academy teams might have different goals, right? Like you have certain academy teams that come in and say, we want to win a lot because we want to hype up our players so we can sell them for more money at the end of the year. Maybe not explicitly, but that's sometimes how it can feel
Just
from the outside.
rolling.
and other academy teams where it's very much about like, hey, we want to be better at the end of the year than we are now, and the number of wins along the way is kind of secondary. I'd say that people looking at Golden Guardians from the outside would look more to that latter option. Is that kind of how you're viewing it this year? Is it just about improvement week to week and how the players are doing?
I think the only thing I ever really care about is that we perform the best we can in our next match. And that is as far as I tend to look ahead. In terms of an overall arching picture, I think when you look at our roster, yeah, there are players who definitely need time. We have some fresh rookies and we have like very minimal experience, as I said before. That's not to say that we're not going to be trying our best to be competitive, but the end goal in academy is to build the best player that you can, and that does come with just growing pains, right? Like teaching fundamentals, making sure you drill those basics down, and actually giving these players good core basics so that wherever they go, whether it is staying in this program or actually like taking their career to the next level, they have a good foundation, right? That's always like the biggest takeaway when you have newer players, and drilling those basics, it takes a little bit of time, but once they get it, you do tend to see a lot of progress.
So you got some players in your team this year who are definitely coming in, without any real competitive experience. You've got, I'd say Rosethorn and Yunby are the ones that really kind of fit that description. What's that been like with those two players? Did you have many expectations about what their knowledge level would be coming in?
No, I take things as they come. I don't really have had any expectation initially. I am very happy with what they have done in the last month or so that we've been practicing. One of the downsides to like the last 4 or 5 years of recycling the same players was that there was this kind of generational gap where you have a lot of these players who do have game knowledge, then you just have all these players who never like were taught and they never learned, because like where are they going to go learn? So this is very fascinating in an amazing way, because you have these super motivated players who are doing everything and like soaking this information like sponges. But you have to really teach the core of the game at the competitive level, which is a lot about, tempo and playing the game based on that versus anything else. So when you start to do that, you tend to see where they need the work. But I'm really happy with how my rookies have been doing and the work they're putting in, because they are being given so much information every game and they're really implementing it at a good pace.
So what's an example? Let's say, if you can do this without revealing anything too much.
Sure.
You're playing a couple of games with Rosethorn, or you're playing a couple of scrim blocks, let's say, and what's an example of the kind of thing that you'd have to sit down with them after and say, okay, it seems like, there's a concept here that you haven't really grasped yet, or maybe nobody's started to yet. Like, what's an example of that concept? What would you be explaining to him?
Well, I mean, in jungling, the hardest thing in competitive is managing your time, right? Like, you don't want to waste time versus like farming camps and ganking, right? And so understanding when is a good timer to actually gank when you're up tempo, when it's good to keep your tempo, whether it's good to play for enemy camps, what are you considering in the game when you make these decisions? That is the hardest thing to do, because you're going from a situation of you weren't playing to now a situation, well, you're on a team with a bunch of people who are like going to give you lane updates, and it's on you to make that decision. That's a lot of information to process. And so just learning like which ones are good and bad is something as a jungler that every jungler struggles with when they're starting, right? An easier example to visualize would be in mid lane, right? And I can teach every mid laner this, actually, if you want to be a better mid laner, guys. It's just the concept of sitting on a pink in the river, just going fog, right? Just going off the map when you push a wave and just not moving. Like, how scared is the team going to be if they don't see the LeBlanc versus if they see the LeBlanc, right? And these are like concepts I was learning in season 4, right? So the fact that we're still getting to teach that, 7, 8 years later, those are like super important concepts that people just did not learn. And so having to teach it now and seeing them actually use it, it's so fun, because you actually see the improvement so visually on the screen, right? And it's promising, with everything that's happened in Academy. And it's kind of what I envision Academy to be in the end, which is you do see a lot of newer players coming in and they're getting an opportunity to try to make a go of this. So I'm pretty happy with how that's been going.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of thing where even once you get up to kind of LCS level or LEC or other places, you still cycle back to those things now and then, right? Because you start layering other concepts on top of those things, and eventually
exactly.
you're going to have to kind of remind yourself of kind of one level of complexity lower and constantly have to be like, revisiting at those levels. So introducing in the very first place, it's going to take a while to kind of make it all come naturally and be second nature, rather than having to think, all right, after I push this wave, remember, I'm going to go stand out in the river, whatever it is. And it takes, a lot of repetition, I think, and a lot of opportunity to make
Yeah,
things that second
yeah.
nature.
It's just the idea that everything you do has some type of consequence in the game, right? Like your actions do have consequences. And I would say that it's harder to go from like North American solo queue to competitive than it is to go from like academy or amateur to the LCS.
Hmm.
Just because there is like a huge gap of knowledge from the past couple of years that we're kind of like catching up on now. At least what I've noticed compared to the last time when I was, with IMT or Optic, there's certainly a better quality of practice now, and there's certainly like a lot more hunger throughout the league. So I think we're heading in the right direction, but definitely going to take some time with some of the younger guys just to get them up to speed. But I think every team that I've seen has done a pretty good job about that as fast as possible because there are like really talented players in this league.
Yeah, for sure. And then you have other players who have been around in academy for a little while, to different levels. Like you have Prismal and you have Chime on your team as examples of this. They've had the opportunity to learn from coaches at some of this kind of stuff. They've also had the opportunity, I'm sure, to understand what it's like to lead comms in an organized setting, which solo queue players might not have had. How much do you end up teaching that kind of, what information needs to flow at what time and how to avoid clutter in the comms and all those kinds of things? Is it a similar balance of that versus kind of the individual mechanical map play kind of things?
Well, it's kind of evolved over the years, right? Because initially when I started, you could have this super structured like C9 high level type shot calling system where one guy is literally the faker of your comms and everyone else is just pumping information whatever he asks for, right? But nowadays everyone needs to kind of understand the direction the game is going, and when the game is played through you, it's your responsibility to talk about what you need to be enabled, right? So when the game is played through mid jungle, yeah, there's going to be some hiccups, right, as you learn. But if we're talking about player development and making the best players possible, the players that the game is played through, they need to be the ones communicating a lot of the time. So you kind of go both ways on this, where you want to develop the players, but you also want to give some structure so they're not going too far the other way. And just finding that balance is the secret, I think, in a development system. Whereas, if we're talking about trying to win, you look at what you have and you just make the best situation that you possibly can. Right. So it's
Yeah,
just a
that
bit
makes sense.
different in terms of mindset and approach for me.
Yeah, it just from my experience of it, the limited amount of opportunity I have to listen in on comms at different levels, I've noticed a very big difference between if you get kind of 5 amateur upcoming players together versus even just having 1 or 2 players with a decent amount of academy experience, and the kinds of information that flow. Like I think Rift Herald plays are one of the classic examples of this, like the 8-minute Rift Herald rotation.
Oh, yeah.
Does somebody talk about it at 6:30, yes or no? And in a group of 5 amateur players, often nobody will say anything about it. And when you have that one amateur player or academy player in, they're actually saying, okay, Rift Herald is coming up at this amount of time. Are we going to play for it? Yes or no? What kind of tempo do we have to rotate for it? And like actually
Well, it's
lead a
just the level
conversation.
of what you have to communicate too, right? Like at a lower level, you have to micro and communicate more because the
Mm,
basic steps aren't actually done consistently, right?
yeah.
When you get to play at a higher level, like one of the nicest things about like LEC and LCS is, well, you just say, hey, we're playing mid top, we're playing mid bot, and everyone just knows immediately,
Yeah.
like, okay, lane assignments, vision, like this,
Yeah.
tempo, this, we're
Yeah. That
playing
means I
this
should
wave.
pull this wave and
Yeah,
put a
and
ward here.
everyone problem solves it like that, right? But when you get to this point, like at the very start, especially amateur academy, and I think this goes throughout, you do have to micro a bit more until people get
Hmm.
comfortable, and that's just part of learning, honestly, man. Like you're gonna have to trip and fall if you want to be successful. It just comes
Yeah.
down to how many times you do the reps. So just got to grind through it. It's just you definitely have to talk more about like, hey, walk here, do this, step here,
Hmm.
next wave, and you're more microing in the moment because you're not as comfortable just with the basic movements of the map yet.
Yeah, for sure. How have you felt about the level of play happening in academy right now? And I think given that we've had a few different trends going on recently, right? We had kind of the second oceanic influx this year, where a year ago we had
The
kind of that initial,
boys.
yeah, we had a bunch of oceanic players last year, and now it's like the big flood because of the OPL kind of being turned off. Do you think that's made a noticeable difference in the level of academy play?
Absolutely. I think you're just being handed a region that had a bunch of talented players and saying, hey, they're domestic. I think every team was given an insane option now in terms of like what they can pick in the roles, right? They didn't feel as limited. And it does kind of cover that one area where maybe for a few years we weren't actually bringing players through the North American system very well. This covers for that, and that's
Mm,
awesome. But now, how do we use this opportunity, right? Are we going to go back to what was happening before, where teams are just going to build rosters and throw money around and just yeehaw for fun? or are we going to use this opportunity with the younger guys, the Oceanic guys coming in, to build a good foundation throughout the entire ecosystem?
Do you notice a kind of a gap between this group of Oceanic players versus the players kind of coming up from North America up? So you have the players like Rosethorn Yenbi, players in other teams like, you know, I don't know, Copy or Yan or people like that, compared to when you have Thien and Katsuri, and I guess maybe you have experience with them.
I think everyone. No, I think everyone's the same. Everyone is actually like pretty motivated to learn, and it's just an influx of a bunch of talent at once, right? And that's super exciting because when you have all that influx of talent, you have a bunch of motivation, you have a bunch of new things that are going to happen, right? Like the rosters around at North America, LCS, Academy, Amateur, like there are some rosters that look and go, huh, that seems quite interesting. But it's really fun because now you're seeing things that you haven't seen before. So we actually get to try things, right? People can take risks. We can invest our time into helping more players. It's not just you must win now. You can actually build a plan, stick to it, and assuming you do those steps correctly, you can have a really good setup and a really good program at the end of this.
How have you felt about LCS orgs, you know, I think your own org notwithstanding, and the way they've approached kind of building out especially their academy teams? Do you think teams have generally done a better job of like looking for talent that they can move up compared to previous years when I think we, you know, 2-3 years ago, we had a lot more of let's just throw some players in academy, a few LCS backups and whatever, and not to worry about it too much. Do you think that's improving on the org level?
Well, I think in my experience, I was always really fortunate because the people I worked with gave me full autonomy in academy to do things the way I wanted to. So, I mean, I can't really speak to all the other teams, but what I will say is looking at the direction the league's heading now, I am happy with how things are looking this year. In previous years, in my experience, you know, I got to work with obviously the IMT guys before here, and yeah, we got to build a roster, got to play, have fun with a bunch of guys who were pretty close on the cusp of going pro. And I think now when you look at the rosters, most teams have an idea of you need to have some experience and a little bit of youth, but you have to build for your LCS team in the end, right? Whether you need suitable replacements in a certain role, whether you have import flexibility. So I think we're all getting more educated on it as we go, because when it started, it really was the Wild West, right? Like no one actually knew how to build a good program. The only way we're going to learn is through trial and error. So yeah. I think now we finally have that opportunity, right?
Yeah. Like anything else, you find the ones who succeed and you kind of say, oh, what did they do well, and try to emulate that.
Yeah, but defining success in academy is very difficult, right? Because absolutely. Defining success, like if you want me to win, I'll pick to outscale every single game and I'll just become the best at doing that, right? Like you're not going to beat the late game king in the late game, right? But that's how you win in best of one. That doesn't make you necessarily a better player. What makes you a better player is like recognizing your windows and actually using them to play the game at the proper pace. And if you miss those windows and you lose, that's on you for playing the game poorly. But if you go to that review and go, well, it's just pick to outscale, yeah, you can win. But that doesn't actually define your success necessarily as a player. That just makes you look good, obviously, in the eyes of the general public, and that is a huge strength, but I don't believe that makes you a better League of Legends player necessarily.
So what would you define to be success for an academy program within the program you're working in? Like, when you came to the end of the year, what would you say, I feel good about the way this year went? Like, what conditions would you have to hit?
Visual progress that every player has improved enough where I believe they could play at the professional level. Excuse me. So it would be my own personal eye test, and then internally, do we feel that we reached the marks that we had set out before the year for these players, right? How far are they along in their development? And obviously with development, you will start winning games anyways, right? So being competitive and having that linear progress that you can kind of visually see, that's all I'm really looking for. You shouldn't really aim, I think, anything beyond that. You just want to be the best you can every game, and that's it.
Yeah, that's fair. And as an org, I think that also makes sense because I don't have the contracts in front of me, but I assume you have these guys all on multiple year deals, right? Or maybe not.
There's a GCD. You can go take a look if you need, but I'm not too worried about the numbers or anything like that. But I definitely know that the guys are here for this year and they're putting in more work than I had anticipated, and it's super positive. It feels a lot more European in that way. So I've had more fun this time around being back in NA for sure.
Yeah, I think the idea of the length of the contracts and retaining them, all that is more for the management to worry about rather than the coaching, right? But
I'm
so
just here to coach
Danon and
League of
John can,
Legends,
yeah,
say some
Danon and John can
words.
have their concerns about, do we develop this player well enough to, play them next year in LCS or whatever that's going to be, right? That's up to them. For you, it's just develop them and go from there.
Yeah, no, the structure at Golden Guardians is really nice, right? It feels more like traditional sports, which is what I'm most accustomed to. Is I have people I can go to and get good feedback from, which is something I think that is I hadn't really experienced in esports until I got here. So it's more fun for sure to have that clear direction.
Yeah, sounds good. So have you been paying much attention to the amateur level and how that's kind of changed this year? Have you been had any time to even watch that?
Little bit, like there is a lot of League of Legends to watch, and I mean North American amateur certainly isn't like at the highest priority, but I've caught the games and the tournaments where there's stuff to watch. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that you were involved on some level with kind of proposing the format that's happened for the current year with the kind of combination of amateur and academy.
Yeah.
The tier 2 tournaments qualifying amateur teams to play alongside some of the academy teams in tier 1, and then eventually all coming together in the Proving Grounds tournament. What can you tell me about kind of the development of that format and what your input was into it?
Um, that was a long process. I know that Riot Ice Chest Derek had gone out on Twitter and kind of spoken about it a bit, but I think what I can say is the overarching theme and the way things are being done and how we're finishing with this big proving ground tournament and all that, those were ideas that we all came together, just sitting down for hours and trying to figure out how do we make this region better, right? And then John, obviously, he's done a great job with not only this but the LCS format, right? Like the lock-in tournament was incredible. He's always been there to help kind of just talk it out where he sees the problems because he's an expert in this region, right? I'm in and out every year. Yeah, so I, I would say that process took a couple years, but the people involved were all super intelligent about it. We all kind of understood what needed to be done. And we just went out and we did it, and now we get to see the formats in action. And I think so far the response has been good. I'm curious to see how it builds out beyond just this year after the initial excitement dies down. But I would say that we have a step in the right direction where more players who are domestic can actually have an opportunity now to go pro. We're giving more avenues for that, which I think is something we didn't have for a long time.
Yeah, I think that's the clear win in this format is now if you are a solo queue player who wants to know how could I someday get to the LCS, well, now you can actually know playing in these amateur tournaments will very directly get you exposed to competition against better amateur players, eventually potentially against academy players. Being able to connect with LCS orgs because they actually have reason to watch the amateur level now. So yeah, I think that whole like creating a pathway to pro is much clearer now than it has been in the past.
Yeah, it always stuck out. I remember in like season 2 when I first started, there was always this like graphic on the old League of Legends website that was like the path to pro on like a scroll, right? And it always just stuck to me that even back then they had like a linear path, and then somewhere along the way we had lost it.
Yeah.
I just kind of wanted to help rebuild it more than anything. I didn't know the extent of what my involvement would end up being. Getting to be a part of this process was fun, honestly, and now to get to see it play out is fun. But there's going to be stuff to improve, right? Nothing's perfect, so we'll see how the year goes. Hopefully, it gets the result that we're aiming for, and who knows what happens next. Hopefully, the best.
I think there are certainly some rough edges around it. I think whether or not LCS organizations are, motivated enough to actually directly contribute at the amateur level, that's one of the big ones. We have some of the orgs in it. We have, C9, EG, 100 Thieves are all running their amateur teams. There's some other LCS orgs that are either kind of involved on a certain level, maybe under the surface a little bit, or sniffing around and considering getting involved. So
there's some technical stuff with getting involved there, right, for all the teams right now. So hopefully in the future we can have a more direct process for every team. But I know there's some like technical stuff that caused a few teams to pull out.
Well, and I'm also very curious to see whether the appetite from LCS orgs will be adjusted based on the success of the ones who are currently doing it. So if they look at Evil Genius's Prodigies and say, okay, they just lost last night in quarterfinals of the current tournament, but they did very well in the previous one. Like overall, they seem to be doing quite well. But then you look at Cloud9 Amateur, which is struggling a little bit. 100 Thieves next isn't so far having the success this year that they did last. It's very early still, right? But all those
Yeah.
teams need more time, I'd say, to ramp up and get to the level of kind of the top end amateur teams that are actually winning all the time right now. But if they reach that goal, I'm sure it'll motivate more LCS orgs to say, hey, we can do the same thing and we can find these great players just like they are, maybe even do a better job of it. But if they fail, and let's say Cloud9 Amateur doesn't even reach the tier 1 tournaments, say they don't even reach them again in summer, maybe some other orgs go, oh boy, that looks like it's harder than we thought it was. I'm curious whether they'll look at that and say, we can do better than them, or whether they'll look at it and say that.
But is
looks like
that the
was just a
goal of
race, right?
building an amateur? Is that the goal? Like, if the goal is player development, even if you don't make the proving grounds, as long as there's like visual linear improvement on the screen, I feel like that's a success, right? Getting those blue chip or maybe just underrated prospects into your organization, getting them into your system, and kind of integrating them into how you want the game played. I don't think winning or losing necessarily makes that good or bad. I think people put way too much of a value on that in amateur. I understand results are important, right? But ultimately there's a balance there where right now it's still like 80-20 the wrong way, where you're looking more where you want like a 70-30 for my POV.
Sure.
Of like, winning's important, but like people do need to get better. Otherwise, what's going to happen? You're going to have people who play academy for 4 or 5 years, never move up, and like that's it. And that's not what the league should be for in the end, right?
Like definitely improvement is the goal, but I guess it depends where you improve from and to, and the place you arrive at has to be high enough level that it was worth it, right? Like let's say Cloud9 Amateur, just for the sake of continuing the example, let's say they start out as like the 20th best amateur team, and by the end of 2021, they're like the 10th best amateur team, and none of those players are quite good enough to get to academy. Is that success? I mean, they all improved a lot, but if none of them were good enough to be promoted into academy at the end of the year, I'd say that's not good enough, even though they improved a lot, right? So I guess that's kind of how I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a process to, again, like you're going to have a new staff on the 3rd level team for amateur now. You're going to have a new system. It's all going to come with time, same as academy, right? There's going to be some hurdles at the start here with some teams trip and fall. And once we do start to get it down, like what North America does a good job of is once they figure it out, they actually put the resources in and they can figure it out. So once that part comes, I'm looking forward to it. But like getting there, let's skip the BS part and just get to that as fast as we can.
Well, and I think the availability of good coaches at the amateur level is something that like I'd say the level of coaching at academy now is a lot better than it was 3 years ago. But it took time,
I'm getting challenged. I'm getting challenged way more in this first month than I did the last time I was here. Like, it's not even a question. These former players are doing a really good job coming into coaching, and I feel like when I play the game now, or like when we're loading into the game, like you can see that every team has a higher level, not only in like drafts, but in gameplay, but even just the practice habits. You know, there's less teams who are late. There's less, fiestas. It feels better practicing now this year so far.
Yeah, and for amateur coaching to make a similar increase is also going to just take that much more time and an opportunity for those coaches to gain experience coaching an amateur team and improving. So, I think you could look at people coaching with 100 Thieves Next or whatever it's going to be, Fallen Bandit there, and he's had some opportunity now, so he's got that year of development as a coach, whereas other coaches at the amateur level, they're still figuring it out. So I think that's an opportunity for a lot of growth too at the amateur level for those players to be that much further along by the time they hit academy, right?
Yeah, I mean, with the coaching thing, it's hard because people sometimes ask me like, how did you get started? You can't do what I did anymore. I woke up one day, I literally woke up one day and was like, yeah, I want to coach League of Legends. I messaged someone on Reddit, and then 6 months later I was in the LCS, right? Yeah. So like that's a different era, right? Like coaching like that is not really a thing, but there's not also a great way to get into coaching right now if you're never a former pro player, right? Yeah. No experience, and you just watch the game or are low elo, right? Like there's not actually a great way to get in, and until there's a more standard way to develop coaches, you're going to see more and more former players and like less and less of the people from my generation of coaching, which is we've just been here so long that we became really, really good along the way. Right? That's why these former pros come in and you do see this shift where there is actual like linear progress much faster, as these guys were players. And that's a huge advantage over a lot of the coaching here, where I think we never really had a great route for those people to learn. Whereas in Europe, I mean, you go to Europe and they just beat it into you until you learn how to coach well, man. It's it's a crash course over there.
Yeah. Well, and I think that presence of former players as coaches is something that is mirroring traditional sports more and more, right? Where you look at like the NHL, or I'm sure, NBA, NFL, these kinds of things, and so many of the coaches played pro for some amount of time, or at least they played, semi-pro, something like that. I mean,
You don't have to be a former, like there are
you don't
great
have to,
minds. There's great minds in the game who weren't former pros. I just feel like
but the proportion
at,
is fairly high,
yeah.
though.
No, at the current state of North America, the best thing we can do is put in former players as coaches right now,
Mm.
help build whatever structure we need to teach people how to coach, and now you've created this system, right? And if we do that, then I'm curious to see kind of how things go.
Yeah, so like looking closely at examples like Golden Glue coming in to be a coach, or others like that, and see. I mean, Bjergsen obviously, and see how they
Pretty good guy.
succeed.
Pretty good one.
Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. I think there's always this kind of blend of people with formal coaching training and experience who are trying to apply it to League of Legends, and then people with all the League of Legends knowledge trying to learn kind of formal coaching techniques.
Well, see, that one's always been awkward for me, right? Because I came from hockey, and I was trying to go pro in hockey. I obviously didn't, like, I'm here, but I got my coaching certification from Hockey Canada, right? So I came from this traditional background to League of Legends as a 19-year-old.
Yeah.
And oh my God, you can't apply those things
No.
in League of. It's not a thing.
Not directly.
No, but you can make a system around those concepts. You can create those environments that foster development or like promote you playing a certain way, buying into your system, single-minded focus, right? So the concepts and like the learning of how to implement them was super useful. But there's a reason most guys who have the traditional sports coaching background come to League and they're gone within a year. They couldn't cut it here, right? Like it is different and it's its own beast, and you can have some idea of how you want to coach, but it's a completely different ball game in esports than traditional, and some people just struggle to realize that.
Yeah, so I'm curious in that kind of like coach training or coach certification, how much of the emphasis is on like, here are the kinds of drills you can use, and here's the way you structure leadership within your team, and like teach other players to kind of be proxy coaches or stuff like that. And how much of it is on kind of the more kind of subtle side of things about here's the way to help somebody internalize
a lot of it was conflict resolution, and then because it was hockey, we went on the ice and we had to like they would make us do a drill, and they'd give us feedback on the drill we created. So you would kind of learn that, but like conceptually, if you've done both, you can kind of bring both over. Like it's not hard in League of Legends to go look at a concept and say like, hey, today in practice we're just looking at this, right? And that's all we care about, and like having a target in practice instead of just like playing the game and doing the 8x, look at the whole game emotional review, the classic, right? It's like having targeted practice is super useful. Focusing on those singular concepts. You can create drills in this game as well, right? Like, where do you think what else do you practice level ones? Do you guys practice them like scrimming other teams and giving your level ones away? I think that's crazy, right? I do my level ones in an empty custom lobby because I'm not like a noob who's gonna just give level ones away and show them my level one. Like, well, why? Yeah. Like that's so troll. It's like you can create those concepts in League. It's just about understanding like the biggest thing that players lack when they're becoming pros is like understanding accountability. And how you implement your accountability within your team is always the most important thing as a coach. And if you're not able to hold yourself and your team accountable, well, then you don't have anything, is how I've always seen it. So I've always been I've very much focused and put a huge emphasis on own up to the things you do. And it's like no one cares, right? Own up to what you do in the game and accept the play you make, and actions have consequences. It's not always going to go well. But you have to create that system your own way. And I think that with traditional sports, sometimes you come in and people give too much and they push too hard with their feedback and they're too much of a negative. Mm-hmm. But there is a level, right? Like there's a way you can go and push people and get something out of them without necessarily crossing that line of being a negative flamer. I think I've learned that line since I'm still here after all this time. But certainly at the start, I did not. It just comes with time and experience and age.
Yeah, and I'm sure, reading and interpreting the personalities of the players you're working with and the types of feedback that resonate with them, right? Versus some players might clam.
I mean, the last generation was just a different breed, right? You could be more direct a couple years ago than you could now. That's just the way it is. It's not like a good or bad thing, right? You just have to understand that reading the situation and understanding the social side of things. 6 years ago, I could just go, hey, you're griefing this, blah, 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 blah. But now it's more of a, you kind of have to take each situation as it comes, because there's a lot more complexity and a lot more diversity in the league as time's gone on, right? We're not just five homies trying to go pro anymore, living in a closet together in 2014, right? That's not a thing anymore.
Yeah, and good, good thing too.
Yeah, no, it's nice.
So let's talk a little more about like your experiences coaching different environments, because I think we're already getting into that a little bit. But you have been around quite a bit. You've coached with Giants in the LEC. You were in the LFL summer 2020, right?
Oh, geez. Yeah, no, I was there.
Yeah, you've been, you know, coaching in, like you said before, in Challenger in Europe, in Challenger in NA before there was Academy. What are some of the big differences you noticed? I think especially people would look at kind of the differences between Europe and North America and say, are there, you know, different continents? Are there really big differences in how they approach things? Really big gaps there? What are some of the differences you've noticed in your experiences?
I think there's two, like if we're not memeing, right? There's like two real ones, right? The first one is just culturally, the way you give and receive feedback in Europe is just way easier for improvement, because people are much easier about detaching their emotion from the situation. So if a game goes bad, you can go, hey man, like you inted, you really griefed this, like this was awful. And what people would consider toxic here, I mean, people have told me in EU I'm too nice, right? Like they say like your feedback is really nice, like you should be harder on us. And then you come here and it's like, oh, I don't know sometimes, and you have to learn to like balance the two regions that way. So it's always fascinated me that in Europe you can speak freely and just say it how it is or how you feel it is as a coach. And if you have the game knowledge to back it up, they're just going to listen to you, right? And so I've always really enjoyed that. I think in North America it's changing now too, though, where players, especially the younger ones, are more receptive to that type of feedback. But it's still a bit different, for sure. And then the other big one is just what you teach, right? Like when I went back in the summer to France, the reason I got just absolutely headshot by everyone and we just got owned was, well, number one, like, I mean, our team had to go through a bunch of changes, but number two, like, we were teaching in academy was at such a low level compared to what you were teaching in the national league. It's like the things you're teaching in NA are like focusing on the actual setup and like the execution, and like there's not much like game theory talk, but in Europe they do the basics really, really well. So you get to talk about, okay, what's like the perfect way to play this comp? Like what are these timers? Like what can we do on this window, right? On this, like how do we want to play this comp? Do we care about this, right? How do we step? And then the best example I can give is even now, watch the teams play with Twisted Fate, man. Like in Europe, they play perfect range, right? Perfect range, 3 seconds, gold card, hit what's in front of you, don't give them the engage. And in NA, we just ult into 5 people, throw the card. We just ult in and we just do it that way, right? So there's this insane difference of finesse and like understanding the game, where here people understand the roles really well. Like if you're a mid laner, you'll understand mid lane really well, but you don't understand like the rest of the map and what's happening. Whereas in Europe, players are just at a base level, they start more intelligent, from my experience, because they just know more about the game.
Do you think that comes from like the level solo queue is played out, or
no? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's solo queue and just like there's more people. Like I think solo queue environment in North America is certainly not something a lot of people enjoy, as we've seen over the years. I certainly
the kindest thing that was said recently was Perk said it's not as bad as people say it is what Perk said, which
it's
is
not
saying
bad.
It's good.
Yeah, like it's
playable.
It's playable, but kind of. So there is a difference. Now, to what level I can't speak to because I'm not the one playing all the time. I will say I've had no issues in Europe when, hey, play X amount of solo queue, right? Get these things ready. But then sometimes over the years in NA that was a thing over the X amount of years where like people just couldn't get games in, for example. And so, I mean, I think because there's more players and there's more players at higher elo and like the quality of game, like there's just better players. You get to play more with these pros in solo queue, and like the average like learning level with National League with LEC there, they do start higher. That doesn't mean they're just like better. It's not as if they're just like born better or built differently, right? Like
they just have the League of Legends gene or not.
No, they just started a higher baseline. And in North America, I mean, there's a reason all of us came from Europe and were brought back to NA. And I say us as if I'm European, geez. But there's a reason we're in NA, right? It's because like when you learn the game over there, you do learn it at a higher level. That's just the truth. And people don't like that, but you do. And then you come here And I came back with this like all this knowledge that I just forgotten about, like all this stuff I wasn't teaching when I came back the first time. Man, it's so much. You just open a book and you just start writing, and you all of a sudden go like, I'm not teaching all these like super basic things. And when you show it to people in Europe and then you show it in NA, there's a difference, but it's not a bad thing. It's a byproduct of what's happened over the last 5 years. Just it is what it
where
is.
you're working from, right? It's the environment that you're in now. So
yeah, it's fascinating though.
Yeah. Do you think, how much of the difference in feedback styles between Europe and North America do you think is like a cultural thing versus like an experiential thing? Like this is the kind of coaching feedback they've had before. This is just the way,
Well, I think European coaches have higher baseline game knowledge in general. So, for example, when I went there the first time, the reason that I feel that way is, I mean, I learned so much every time I went there that by the end on Fnatic, on Giants, and on these teams, when I was able to give feedback, it was do this because of this, and it would just be a okay. So when you saw like Fnatic Academy play or you saw Giants play, they're literally putting what I want onto the map, and that is purely my team doing everything that I'm asking for, right? And that was amazing, right? Like on Fnatic, we made it to LEC, and then we got bought, and unlucky happens. You all get replaced sometimes. And then on Giants, I mean, we were clearly the most improved team that split, and then it wasn't even close, and people like looked at the games and it was very obvious. So I was happy with that. But when you come back here sometimes, because these players aren't used to being challenged with their game opinion, especially from a coaching perspective, all these players have ever wanted in North America are coaches who can back up what they're saying and like give them actual options. There is no issue. There's no coaching issue. Like players are not hard to coach. It's literally just been a lack of good communication skill and a lack of understanding the game at a high enough level. That is obviously just my opinion based on my experience, right? But at least what I've noticed is that's why players here like push back. And when they push back, if you give them an answer that makes sense, like you think they're going to keep pushing? No, they go, oh, okay, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? And they just try it. So you just have to be able to explain your point.
If you try to defend your concept in a way that you don't have good arguments behind it, or that they don't understand the arguments that you're making, maybe
people make blanket statements here. People make blanket statements here like they're in style, man. Like people make so many absolute statements and so many blanket statements, and the thing with League is you can change the game any wave of the game, right? Any wave you can change the whole state of the game. So speaking in those absolutes certainly isn't something I would advise. And I would advise for most people, if you have the opportunity, coach across the like go, and then come back and tell me that for all these years I've been saying it, that it was like too much. Because the people who have gone and come back, they've all told me the same thing. They've all said, oh my God, like you were actually right. Because there is a gap that way, right? And I'm enjoying that in North America now. We're bringing over so many intelligent people like Andre, like Peter Dunn. Like these are some of the smartest people from Europe. And they're just going to make this region better, right? They're just going to make it better from the top down.
Yeah, and I think you hope as from the North American side of things that it doesn't become a situation where you're importing not only your players but your game knowledge from Europe, but that it spills out into the rest of the NA coaches too, right?
Yeah, then get good. Like I don't know what to say. Like if you're bringing in these coaches and you're a North American, like watch what they're doing, see what makes sense to your system, think about implementing it, and just get good, man. Like none of this. People do this way too much. Just like stop that and go do your job. And you can do it because there's amazing resources. You're always learning as a coach. It's not as if I know anything more than other people because I've done this long, right? I'm also learning every single day. I'm watching these VODs and I'm
the game itself is changing. So
I mean, the game is so different now, and it's incredible. But people talk way too much sometimes, and they just need to get their stuff done. And that is my advice to people who are like scared of that. Just get good. R/Korean advice.
Good stuff. Well, I would love to bring a question along that was asked on the Patreon.
Yeah, sure.
Because sometimes give an opportunity for people to leave a comment, to ask questions of the guest in advance. So you can always make sure patreon.com/OraclesElixir that you have a chance to put those questions in advance. So AngusLockhart was wondering, what do you see as the role of the Golden Guardians Academy team, especially given that the LCS roster for the org is more developmental and a bit of a youth movement there? Do you see your players as people who should immediately be competing with the players in the main roster and kind of trying to take their spots and promote within the year, or is it more of a long-term project and more self-contained?
think when you look at the players we have, it's a long-term play for the entire team, right? Like all of us, both rosters. We have a lot of inexperience, but we also have a lot of like very fun gameplay to watch because of that inexperience, right? So the only way you're going to get better is you have to play officials. But that doesn't mean like moving people up and down blindly like that is ever going to be something that makes a lot of sense. I would say that the reason this program attracted me in the first place was you do have this combination of youth and slight experience, and in some cases a bit more. But everyone is just learning, right? It is development. You can see it in both rosters, and both rosters are making progress. So I would say our ultimate job in the end is just to focus on making the best players that we can in our system. And then when we do assess at the end of the split, at the end of the year, how did we do? We want to see where these players are and if what we did was actually useful or if we have to go back to the drawing board.
Do you have conversations with the LCS coaching and the management throughout the year about kind of which year players might be ready for that LCS kind of stint, take a few games? And, you know, if you were looking at, I don't know, Tally and saying, hey, if we wanted to put him in for a weekend, would he be ready for that? Like, do you have those conversations along the way?
Yeah, no, the conversations are consistent. We want to make sure that both teams are focused on the same areas, whether it's just trading ideas on draft, because me and Nick Smith certainly have different ideas on how we draft. But then making sure we're teaching the game the right way and that we're on the same page and just making sure that everyone knows what's going on. We want to stay in the loop, right? We are one team. We are not two teams fighting against each other. We are one team with two rosters, and our goal is what in the LCS? It's to build a team and see the development of them this year and see how far we can push them. That isn't going to change in Academy. How good can we make these players and how far can we push them?
Great. SeeEl wants to know, what are some pieces of advice that you have on how to get good? Let's talk specifically as a coach, I think, because I think that's where you have.
So if I could afford you a story, yes, if I could afford you at the time to tell you a story about when I was with Cloud9 and I was in Korea and I met Reapered. So I thought I knew how to review VODs, right? And then C9's doing a tryout for the coach. It's 2016. Along comes Reapered. After the first game he reviewed, I just went, I don't know what I'm doing. That's it. I'm an idiot.
Good old wave of imposter syndrome, right? Like,
no, I just had this like, why am I here when you have this guy who does everything that I do except so much better, right? And so I spent the next month just talking to him. And the biggest thing I took away from those reviews is like, well, number one, as a coach, like you can't get emotional. You just can't. Like you have to learn to detach from losing, right? Like I laugh when my teams are losing now because like not because haha they're so bad, but just like what else can you do? Like why should I like it is what it is. You just take it as it comes. But when you review the game, like the goal when you review the game is to give feedback that they can apply in future games. So like don't look at the team fight and go, well, if you had queued a bit more to the left, this would have been a perfect team fight. No, go look at the setup. Like, hey, did you give this vision properly? Was it more important to be in the river than fixing our waves because of the game state? Does our comp need this? Can we face check them? Why was our tempo scuffed? Was the vision bad? Did we miss a bush? You look at specifics. Right? You don't go into practice and look at the whole game and go, well, we have to go from early game to mid game to late and like look at how to win this game. You want to take concepts that you can apply in the future, right? And so the most important thing I would say is if you don't know the correct answer, that's okay as a coach, because quite frankly, like there aren't a lot of people who know a lot at that level. And so what Reaper taught me at that time was number one, like you need to know that much if you're going to coach the way I do, right? And number two, the way you give feedback has to be direct, honest, but it has to be the right stuff. And he showed me how to coach a high-level team, right? That was a high-level team on C9. And so I just took that. I mean, I wasn't good enough. I was out of there. Like, I spent my month in Reaper, and I was like, thank you, man. Like, I'm going to go use this now. And the immediate change in the way players responded to me was incredible, where it became, instead of an argument, it just became a, wow, we're going to do what he says because it makes sense. And I think having that type of responsibility is something as a coach you should strive for, because it means that ultimately everything comes back on you and it's your job in the end to get the most out of your players. And I like that. I like that accountability and that responsibility. It makes me feel like I have purpose in this job. And so the way I coach is very simple. If I think something's right, we're going to have a discussion about it, and we're going to go ahead and go with whoever is right. But my job is to be right more often than not, since I'm the one who's been around the longest, right? So for me, it's just always been that. So my advice would be figure out if you're more of a facilitating type coach. Figure out if you're more of a like details oriented, do it this way because here's the logic why. Then go do it. And then when you mess up, because you're gonna mess up, accept it, learn why you messed up, and just keep grinding. Right? Like there was a time where no one would hire me in 2015. I had to pull 5 random people from the solo queue ladder, and I just built a team and went back into Challenger Series. Like sometimes you do have to just willpower it, you know? So
yeah, speaking a little more on the VOD review side, this is something that I've had a lot of interest in recently. When you approach VOD review, how much do you focus on like mistakes and addressing them and saying, hey, next time in this type of a situation, here's the type of thing you should be thinking about, versus balancing that with things like positive reinforcement or other things like that? Like what kind of approach do you take on that overall kind of thing? Like how much do you focus on mistakes versus concepts versus whatever else?
I think it just depends on the day and the situation, right? Like when we were talking like we're in a must-win situation on Fnatic, right? That was how do we win this game and how do we navigate out? Like every detail matters. We must. So we would sit there and break down every game like absolutely insane people together, and it was fun, right? But then on Giants, it was like, okay, we must win now. So what do? Well, we built the 1-3-1 never team fight because we suck at team fighting style. But here it's okay. We're building a good game. Why did it go wrong? Why did this game go poorly? Well, what are we focused on today? What is our goal in practice? Right? And then if the goal in practice, I'll give you an easy example. My favorite one. Let's contest every dragon today. Oh, I love that one. That's my favorite team goal, man. Oh, it's so crazy. And so you go into the day and it's just like, it's going to be just an absolute disaster at the dragon pit, right? But I don't care if I win or lose. I don't care even in the game state. The first step is you contest every dragon. Then, okay, guys, consider the game state, right? If you don't want to contest that because it'll boom the game, talk about what you want to do. Talk about if you want to cross map. Use this timer. Oh, we did the cross map. Let's look at the setup of the cross map. Everything builds on itself, right? And the problem is when people review, so like all these reviews people do on like Twitch, this is not how you review for a team, right? Like this is just a straight play-by-play and like
basically what I'm getting at.
Yeah, right. It's like no, but like these people don't review as like none of those reviews would ever work in a competitive team, right? Like those are reviews for the people, which is good. It's a different type of review, and it's good to like give general game knowledge. But if you're talking about like reviewing for a team, hey, you don't watch that. Just mute that, close that, and go review properly.
Are there any resources you've seen that would kind of help people learn how to do good VOD reviews as a coach?
Yeah, you guys can follow me on Twitter and sub to my Twitch channel, and I'll do it, and I'll teach you real fast.
Here we go.
I don't think this for me.
No, there's a question from JustCasual who wants to know what it's like having a large coaching staff like Golden Guardians has set up for this year, compared to the maybe smaller staffs you've worked with in the past.
Okay, so just so everyone's on the same page. For 6 years, I never had a staff. It was just me versus the world. This is the first time I've had a real staff, right? So I want you to imagine that, right? In like 2 cases over my entire career, I got to work with John and I got to work with Danon, right? That was it. Everyone else never existed. So like having people you can rely on, intelligent people who I can have discussions with who know about the game, sometimes to a deeper level than myself where I can also improve. It's so insane, dude. It's such a buff. Like, oh, it's so fun. You can just go and have a discussion about anything. You can talk about draft and they'll give you something and you'll go, how did I miss that? Right? Or you'll talk about, a game you saw or something that a player is doing, whether it's LCS or Academy, like some of those small detail things that you have to talk about. So being able to just bounce those ideas and feeling like it's an environment that it doesn't actually matter if you're right or wrong. It just matters you guys all get to the right like resolution. Having everyone on that wavelength, it just makes my life so much easier. I have no stress for the first time doing this job. Like it's so fun. I'm so happy right now.
That's good to hear. I'm glad for you. And hopefully later today, you'll have more reasons to be happy. Although it sounds like whether your team wins or loses today, you're going to be laughing either way. So that's good.
I didn't say that.
You said you laugh when you lose. No, I know what you meant. So you guys are playing later today, right? Who are you up against?
It's a good question. It's Cloud9.
So you're playing Cloud9 today.
Yeah, we're playing C9A.
You're playing Cloud9 Academy on Wednesday. Thursday, you guys, are you thinking at all about Thursday yet?
Fat, if you asked me, like, who are you playing, I couldn't tell you. I have to open my
Focus
calendar.
On one day at a time.
I mean, it's 2 games back to back. Just win one of them, you know?
So yeah, we'll definitely watch you guys in Academy, watch how your players are doing and developing, and be cheering for you guys. Thank you very much for joining me on the show today. So what's the best way for people to follow your work if they want to see what you're working on and what you've been up to?
I mean, just my Twitter, guys. I'm getting too old to stream and keep up on the TikToks and all that. So if you want some bad tweets, I tweet the same 5 things for 7 years. Go hit a follow. It's kind of fun. There's some bangers out there sometimes. I tweet 1 banger a year.
Nice. So that's at Kubz91. We'll make sure that the details on that are in the show notes, so everybody can follow along with that and follow Kubz, follow Golden Guardians Academy. You can support the True Sight podcast at patreon.com/OraclesElixir. You can subscribe on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts, as well as anchor.fm/TrueSight. And make sure you check out the Oracle's Elixir Discord server to talk about League of Legends esports, data science, and a lot of other topics. Links for all of those will be in the show notes as well. This has been the True Sight podcast with Kubz, and I'm Tim Sevenhuisen. Thanks for listening.